Excerpt from Mules and Men by Zora Neale Hurston. During the late 1920s and early 1930s, Zora Neale Hurston traveled through the American South collecting local stories and folklore. In 1935, she wrote Mules and Men, a collection of the tales she had heard. The very next afternoon, as usual, the gregarious part of the town's population gathered on the store porch. All the Florida flip players, all the 11-card layers. But they yelled over to me they'd be over that night in full. And they were. "Zora," George Thomas informed me, "you come to the right place if lies is what you want. I'm a-goin' to lie up a nation." Steve Nixon was holding class meeting across the way at St. Lawrence Church, and we could hear the testimony and the songs. So we began to talk about church and preachers. "Aw, I don't pay all these old preachers no rabbit foot," said Ellis Jones. "Some of 'em is all right, but everybody that's up in de pulpit whoopin' and hollerin' ain't called to preach. I knowed a man that was called by a mule." "A mule, Ellis? All dem believe dat stand on they head," said little Ida. "Yeah, a mule did call a man to preach. I'll show you how it was done, if you'll stand a straightening it." "Now, Ellis, don't mislay the truth. Sense us into this mule callin' business." Ellis: "These was two brothers, and one of 'em was a big preacher, and had good collections every Sunday. He didn't pastor nothing but big charges. The other brother decided he wanted to preach, so he went way down in the swamp behind a big plantation to the place they called the praying ground, and got down on his knees. 'Oh, Lord, I wants to preach. I feel like I got a message. If you done call me to preach, gimme a sign.' Just 'bout that time he heard a voice. 'Wanna, wanna. Go preach, go preach, go preach.' He went and told everybody, but looked like he never could get no big charge. All he ever got called was on some sawmill, half-pint church, or some turpentine still. He knocked round like dat for 10 years, and then he seen his brother. The big preacher says, 'Brother, you don't look like you getting hold of much.' 'You tell him dat right, brother. Groceries is scarce. I ain't dirtied a plate today.' 'What's de matter? Don't you get no support from your church?' 'Yeah, I gets it such as it is, but I ain't never pastored no big church. I don't get called to nothing but sawmill camps and turpentine stills.' The big preacher reared back and thought a while. Then he asked the other one, 'Is you sure you was called to preach? Maybe you ain't cut out for no preacher.' 'Oh, yeah,' he told him. 'I know I been called to the ministry. A voice spoke and told me so.' 'Well, seem like if God called you, he is mighty slow in putting your foot on the ladder. If I was you, I'd go back and ask him again.' So the poor man went on back to the praying ground again and got down on his knees. But there wasn't no big woods like it used to be. It has been all cleared off. He prayed and said, 'Oh, Lord, right here on this spot 10 years ago, I asked you if I was called to preach, and a voice told me to go preach. Since that time, I've been struggling in your moral vineyard, but I ain't gathered no grapes. Now, if you really call me to preach Christ and Him crucified, please give me another sign.' Sure enough, just as soon as he said that, the voice said, 'Wanna. Go preach, go preach, go preach.' The man jumped up and says, 'I knowed I been called. That's the same voice. This time I'm a-goin' to ask him where must I go preach.' By that time the voice come again, and he looked way off and seen a mule in the plantation lot, with his head all stuck out to bray again, and he said, 'Uh-huh, you's the very son of a gun that called me to preach before.' So he went on off and got a job plowing. That's what he was called to do in the first place."